do you come up with a story like that without getting lost yourself?
Yeah, I wasn't as organised as I think a lot of authors are. I hear a lot of authors talk about big mood boards and, you know, walls full of, you know, like you imagine when people in crime dramas when people have pins and maps and well, and I was never ever that organised. I had the seed of an idea and I literally just sat down and started writing it. I never had the capacity to kind of put it all out without writing it down. I had to just start and write it. I think the idea grew itself, which I know sounds like a cliche, but once I started writing it, it changed quite dramatically in the process of writing it from the first few pages. In contrast to what Sophie said, I didn't know how mine was going to end, and I didn't actually know that it started as a standalone book, but when I got about halfway through, I realised I couldn't possibly write it in one book, it would have to be more. So it started to evolve as it got towards the end, and then I realised it wasn't over once I'd finished it, so I started the second one.
Excellent.
In the same disorganised way, which was just picking up my laptop and writing it. So.
Great. We've got any questions anybody else would like to ask about that process? I like that you got so involved in it as you went along, had to discover what the story would be.
Not very organised.
What influenced you to write a book?
I think just loving reading and writing always, which I know is quite obvious, but I think from being very young, when I was about 5, I said all I ever wanted to do was write books, and obviously everyone says things like that, and young boys often say they want to be Premiership footballers, and when you say something like that, people tend to smile and nod and assume that that's something you probably won't do. But I've always said that's what I wanted to do, and I did a lot of, like Sophia said, a lot of writing beforehand, which was terrible. So much terrible writing, where I wrote loads of things and just put them away and revisited them and realised they were never going to see the light of day. This was the first time I had an idea that I thought I could finish, and it followed a period of kind of prolific reading where I just happened to have a lot more time, and I was spending a lot more of my free time reading all sorts of books I love, and I happened to really enjoy reading young adult fiction myself, so the more I read, the more inspired I was to kind of get on with it. So it's quite lucky it didn't turn out to be a vampire book, because this was around the time that Twilight went mad, but I didn't want anything like that. I didn't want to do what I'd done before, and I think the witch thing was kind of underrepresented, and for me carried so much weight and had so much potential to be a really strong story, so I decided to go down that route with it.
Thanks, June.
You said there was in the blurb, I think it was, there was a boy, she meets a boy in it.
Yeah.
Do you think that the girl needs to meet a boy in a story, and she has to have somebody to help her through what she's going through?
That's a very good question. I don't think there has to be a boy. I think I wrote a lot of it like myself as a teenage girl, and there's always a boy, isn't there? So I think you draw on that, and that's where it comes from. But if you go through the trilogy, interestingly, Jake, who is her love interest, can help her the least, really, in terms of, apart from the fact that she loves him and she wants him around, he actually has the least to offer in terms of playing a role in saving her. She has to save herself. And as you go into the second book, he gets pushed back again because he is entirely the wrong person to help her. So no, there doesn't have to be, and I think it's an important message that no, she didn't need saving by the boy she was in love with. I think he's very relevant to the story, and I wouldn't change him, but he can't help her. She has to help herself, or even use other people over him, which is causing obviously some upset because he gets kind of sidelined a little bit, especially as we go into the second book. So no, she doesn't need him, but I think it's important to her, and it's important to kind of explore the fact that as teenagers, I think when we first have those kind of feelings of love for people, it's an interesting journey, and throwing that into when Scarlett her life was changing so much anyway, it was an interesting dynamic. And for her, Jake actually ends up being quite dangerous in the first one in terms of what he brings into her life. He's fine, but I can't say it, but everything else that comes with it, puts her in more danger. So he wasn't the easiest boy to fall in love with anyway, so it wasn't a Prince Charming situation.
Yes. Thanks.
Were there any books that inspired you to write this?
So many, I think, really. Again, like I said, I love reading, so I read a lot, and this age group I love these books. I think I say it tentatively, and everyone when you say young adult, especially still, I think we're still riding on Twilight, and I think at the minute, obviously, Divergent by Veronica Roth, and all those those books have been turned into a massive film series. They're very inspiring in the sense that you see the scope they have to engage readers and to make them exciting. I personally really enjoyed Twilight. I really liked it for what it was, and I had read all those books and really enjoyed them. But more than the actual books themselves was Stephanie Meyer's story of how she came up with Twilight and how those books evolved. She dreamt one of the scenes from Twilight where they were in the meadow, and she wrote the book from the back of that, and I found that really interesting, that she was writing in between taking her kids to school and doing all sorts of normal things, but she was making time to do something she loved, and it became this huge phenomenon. I was never chasing the phenomenon part, I just thought it was amazing that she had an idea that she loved so much, she made the time to do it, and something incredible happened from it. So I think she's probably one of the main reasons.
Sorry, I shouldn't really do this because I'm a friend, but but it is an interesting one. Obviously, you're a mum now as well. Do you think it's important that, especially girls, grow up with role models in books rather than what you see in magazines and even in films as well? That actually, in books you have a much richer kind of backstory to somebody than the things you see in magazines. And is that something that's important for you, that people find that? I certainly, even as a grown woman, found a lot in her character that you realise yourself, you reflect, because that's something that's quite important.
I think so. Obviously now I've got a girl as well. I only had a boy when I started these, and now I've got a girl, so it's interesting, the change of perspective, I suppose, as you get older. I want her to grow up reading about strong women, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a very strong feminist message either. Somewhere in the middle. I think books are important, full stop. I want both my children to be prolific readers, and I hope they do find role models in the books that they read. I don't know if you've waded into if you've seen the article that was published in Slate about young adult fiction being embarrassing for adults to read, and it was a big, huge social media fight about it this week, because somebody wrote this article which said that anyone over 24 should be embarrassed to read anything for young adults, and the debate was that, you know, we were, I suppose, dumbing down by reading things that were meant for a younger audience. And I wrote a piece in response saying that actually I disagreed. Obviously, and I disagreed more so actually as a reader and a mother than as an author. I'm not offended by anyone's opinion. If people think we shouldn't read YA, then that's fine. But I was more disappointed that we could wipe the fact that people were picking up books at all as a bad thing. If somebody picks up a book instead of watching, I mean, I love telly, don't get me wrong, I would spend hours watching telly as well, so it would be hypocritical of me to say otherwise. And my children will as well, but if someone picks up a book and can be inspired by a book, then I don't see how that can be a bad thing. And I don't care if you're 45 reading a book meant for 18-year-olds. I think if we've created more readers, full stop, then we're doing a good thing. And so when people bash Twilight mums for fangirling over Twilight, I find that really offensive, because I think, well, who cares? Like, if they enjoyed it, they enjoyed it. And Stephanie Meyer's created readers from people who probably wouldn't have picked up a book before. So I think that's a really positive thing. They may not look up to Bella, that's fine, they don't have to. And they may not find their role model in that book. But if they read one, the chances are they'll pick up another in the hope that they'll find something else they like. And eventually they will find someone that inspires them. So yes, specifically as a mother, I think, yeah, we do find role models in books. And I hope that somebody finds a role model in Scarlett by the time the trilogy's finished. But from the school projects that I've already done and the children that I've already met, I think it's already happening. I think that's an incredible thing, and it's something that's better than anything I could ever imagine to come out of this, is that if a teenage girl comes up to me and says she loved it and she was fascinated by it and inspired by it, that's the best thing that could ever have happened. That's exactly what it was for, and why when I was 5 I wanted to write books, because that's why it's important. Sorry, it was a bit long.
Yeah. What's your question behind this?
What would you say is the most inspiring trait in the character of Scarlett for younger readers?
I think it's how she overcomes the fear, because I think we've all been scared of something, and what she's facing is, the magnitude of what she's facing is so significant. But as she goes through, I feel really proud of her. Obviously I wrote it, but like I said, I didn't start knowing how it was going to go, and I'm really proud of how she's developing, because it's real as well, in that she's not suddenly in one book, oh, I'm really scared, and by the second, like, I can do this, it's brilliant, I'm going to take over the world and it's fine. She has this constant battle with what she has to face, but as she goes through it, she deals with her emotions and she addresses them, and she pushes herself that bit further all the time to make it right. And I think now that I'm writing the third one, I really like who she's become, and I think I'm really just proud of how she's developed. And I think by the end, I think she's gonna, well, I feel like she'll come out on top regardless of what happens, because she's done so much to grow as a person.